Julie Hogg, 1989, Billingham. She vanished, but never left her own home. Every town has a place people pass without thinking. A street corner, a row of houses, a small front door under the ordinary gray of an English morning. Most days, nothing happens there. People leave for work, children are dropped off with grandparents, curtains open and close, and life keeps moving in a pattern so familiar that no one stops to question it. But sometimes the most terrifying stories do not begin in abandoned buildings or on empty country roads. Sometimes they begin inside a home where everything looks almost normal. A made bed, locked doors, drawn curtains, a mother calling again and again, waiting for her daughter to answer. And behind the silence, something unimaginable is already hidden. In Billingham, England, in November of 1989, 22-year-old Julie Hogg seemed to vanish from her own life. Her family searched her. Police searched her home. People wondered whether she had walked away from her marriage, her responsibilities, and her child. But Julie's mother, Ann Ming, never believed that. She knew her daughter too well. Julie had a 3-year-old son named Kevin, and Ann was certain of one thing from the very beginning. Julie would not simply leave him behind. What no one knew then was that the answer was not miles away. It was not in London, not on a road out of town, and not in some distant unknown place. It was inside Julie's own house, concealed so cruelly that her family would live for weeks in hope, confusion, and dread before the truth finally came out. And when it did, the horror of what happened to Julie Hogg would not only expose a brutal murder, it would eventually force a change in British law. Billingham sits in Teesside in the northeast of England, an industrial town shaped for decades by chemical works, working families, and ordinary residential streets. In 1989, it was the kind of place where routines mattered. Families helped one another. Neighbors knew who lived nearby. Life could be hard, but it was familiar. Julie Hogg's world was rooted in that same everyday landscape. Julie was born in Yorkshire in 1967 to Ann and Charlie Ming. She had an older brother, Gary, and a younger sister, Angela. After Angela was born, the family moved to Billingham, where Julie grew up surrounded by the people who would later fight so fiercely for her. To Ann, Julie was a mixture of softness and strength. She could be shy, but she could also stand her ground. She was young, still building a life, still working out what her future would look like. When Julie was a teenager, she met Andrew Hogg. They married in 1985 when Julie was 18 and later had their son, Kevin. But by late 1989, the marriage had broken down. Andrew had taken work in London, and Julie was preparing to make the separation formal through the courts. Her life was not simple, but it was moving forward. She had recently started working as a delivery driver for a local pizza shop, and when she worked late shifts, Ann and Charlie helped care for Kevin. That detail would become painfully significant. On the night Julie was killed, Kevin was not at home. He was with his grandparents. On Wednesday, November 15, 1989, Ann went to Julie's house and collected Kevin. Julie was due to work a late shift that evening. She also had an appointment connected to her legal separation the next morning, so she asked Ann to call her early and make sure she was awake. It was a practical request between a mother and daughter who spoke often. There was no reason to think it would be their last ordinary arrangement. Ann expected to phone Julie at 7:30 the next morning. When she did, there was no answer. At first, that could be explained. Julie might have overslept. She might have stepped away from the phone. She might have been getting ready. But Ann kept trying, and the silence did not feel right. Julie had plans that morning. She had Kevin to return to. She was close to her mother. Her sudden silence did not fit the daughter Anne knew, so Anne went to Julie's house. The property was locked. The curtains were drawn. There was no movement inside. Anne did not have a key, and as her worry grew, she contacted Julie's brother, Gary. He came to the house, and eventually they got inside through the back. What they found only deepened the fear. Julie was gone, but the house did not look like a scene of obvious violence. There was no clear sign of a struggle, no immediate clue explaining where she had gone. But the house seemed unusually tidy. Julie's bed was made, which stood out because, according to Anne, Julie was not known for keeping things perfectly neat. The house had looked messier when Anne had collected Kevin the day before. To someone else, that detail might have seemed small. To Anne, it felt wrong. The whole house felt wrong. It looked as though something had happened, and then someone had tried to make the scene appear ordinary. Anne reported Julie missing, but the early response did not bring the urgency the family hoped for. Julie was an adult, and one possible explanation was that she had left of her own accord. Some believed she may have gone away, perhaps to start again elsewhere. But Anne rejected that idea immediately. Julie was a young mother. Kevin was only 3. Whatever difficulties Julie was facing in her marriage, Anne did not believe her daughter would abandon her child without a word. Police did search the property. Forensic officers examined Julie's home over several days, but no body was found. No clear evidence of violence was identified. No final answer emerged from the house that to Anne had felt wrong from the first morning. The investigation continued as a missing person case, while Julie's family remained trapped between fear and uncertainty. Those weeks were a slow kind of torment. Every day without Julie made the possibilities darker. A missing daughter can become many things in the mind of a parent: a runaway, a victim, a person alive somewhere but unable to call, a person already gone. Anne and Charlie were forced to live inside that uncertainty while caring for Kevin and trying to hold the family together. Then came February 5th, 1990. By then, Julie's estranged husband, Andrew, had been given the keys back to the house and had moved into the property with Kevin. Soon after, he noticed an unpleasant smell upstairs. At first, it was treated as something that might have a harmless explanation. The house had been empty for weeks. A bathroom problem seemed possible. Anne suggested cleaning the toilet with bleach. But when Anne later entered the upstairs bathroom herself, she recognized the smell. She had worked as a theater nurse. She understood what decomposition smelled like. This was not a plumbing issue. The odor was coming from around the bath. Anne examined the panel. Behind it, she found a body wrapped in a blanket. It was Julie. For weeks, the family had searched for her. Police had searched the house. People had wondered whether she had walked away. But Julie had been inside her own home from the beginning, hidden behind the bath panel in the bathroom. The discovery was devastating in a way that is difficult to measure. Anne had not only lost her daughter, she had found her daughter in the very place where she had begged others to look more closely. The missing person inquiry became a murder investigation. The question was no longer where Julie had gone. The question was who had killed her, hidden her body, and allowed her family to suffer through months of false uncertainty. Andrew was initially questioned in connection with the murder, but he was released without charge. Investigators then focused on William Dunlop, known as Billy, a local man who lived nearby. He was an acquaintance of Julie's and had connections in the neighborhood. He was also known for violence, and his movements on the night Julie died soon became central to the case. The evidence would later show that Dunlop had been drinking heavily that night. He had been at a local rugby club and had been involved in violent and disturbing behavior, including unwanted advances toward a female performer and a fight outside that left him injured. Sometime later, he made his way through Billingham and came to Julie's home. Julie let him in. What happened inside was pieced together through the evidence, court proceedings, and Dunlop's later admissions. The prosecution case was that Julie rejected him and that he attacked her. He strangled her and sexually assaulted her. After killing her, he mistreated her body, wrapped it in a blanket, and concealed it behind the panel of the bath. The ordinariness of the location made the crime even chilling. This was not a remote disposal site. This was not an attempt to move Julie far away. Dunlop hid her in her own home, behind a surface that appeared normal enough to deceive those who later entered the room. When police searched Dunlop's home, they found Julie's house keys hidden beneath floorboards. Fibers connected to clothing were also linked to the blanket Julie had been wrapped in, and forensic evidence placed him in contact with material connected to the crime. To Julie's family, the case against him seemed overwhelming, but what seems clear from the outside must still survive the strict demands of a courtroom. Dunlop denied murdering Julie. In 1991, he stood trial. The jury could not reach a verdict. He was tried again, and once more, the jury failed to agree. After the second failed trial, the prosecution offered no further evidence, and Dunlop was formally acquitted. At that time, the legal meaning of acquittal was final. The double jeopardy rule prevented a person from being tried again for the same offense after being acquitted. For many, the rule was a protection against state abuse and repeated prosecution. But for Julie's family, it became the barrier between a confessed killer and a murder conviction. Because years later, Dunlop admitted what he had done. In 1998, he was imprisoned for serious violent offenses against a woman with whom he had had a relationship and her new partner. While serving that sentence, in 1999, he told a prison officer that he had murdered Julie. He made the admission while believing the law protected him from being prosecuted for murder again. That belief made the confession feel even crueler. He was not only admitting to killing Julie, he was doing it under the assumption that the system could no longer touch him for the crime. Because of the double jeopardy rule, prosecutors could not put him back on trial for murder at that point. Instead, he was charged with perjury for lying under oath during the earlier trials. In April of 2000, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of perjury and received a 6-year sentence. For Ann Ming, that sentence could never answer for Julie's death. Her daughter had been murdered. Her grandson had lost his mother. Her family had endured a failed investigation, 2 failed trials, and now a confession that still did not produce a murder conviction. The law had created a situation that seemed morally impossible. A man could admit to murder, yet still avoid being sentenced for murder because he had already been acquitted. Anne refused to accept that as the final chapter. She began a campaign to change the law. She was not a legal expert. She did not have a team of powerful lawyers working behind the scenes. She was a grieving mother from Billingham who believed that justice had been blocked by an outdated rule. Her demand was focused. In the most serious cases, where new and compelling evidence emerged, the courts should have the power to order a retrial. The campaign was long and draining. Anne wrote letters, met officials, challenged politicians, and pushed the case into public attention. She and Charlie faced a legal system that moved slowly and often seemed resistant to the very change they were seeking. But Anne connected the argument to a human reality no official could easily dismiss. This was not theory to her. This was Julie. This was Kevin. This was a family left to live with a killer's confession and no murder conviction. Eventually, the law changed. The Criminal Justice Act of 2003 altered the double jeopardy rules in England and Wales for serious offenses, including murder, when new and compelling evidence justified a retrial and the Court of Appeal approved it. The change did not erase the principle entirely, but it created a path in exceptional cases. Julie Hogg's case became the first major test of that path. In 2006, William Dunlop was brought back before the courts. This time, he pleaded guilty to murdering Julie. At the Central Criminal Court, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years. The judge's sentence gave Julie's family the murder conviction they had fought for across nearly 17 years of grief, anger, and persistence. But justice arriving late does not undo what came before. It could not give Julie back her life. It could not restore Kevin's childhood. It could not remove from Ann's memory the moment she found her daughter behind the bath panel after being told there was no body in the house. Kevin was only 3 when Julie died. For years, his family tried to protect him from the full truth, telling him that his mother had died after slipping in the bath. When he was 13, he learned what had really happened. The knowledge that his mother had been murdered and that the killer had once been acquitted became part of the story he had to carry into adulthood. Ann Ming was later awarded an MBE for her work in helping reform the law, but she has said that no honor could replace her daughter. The legal victory was historic, yet the personal loss remained permanent. In later years, Dunlop's possible move to open prison conditions brought the case back into public attention. Anne opposed the move, arguing that her family was still living with the consequences of his violence. As of the latest public reports, Dunlop remains in custody. The murder of Julie Hogg is solved. Her killer confessed and was eventually convicted. The law that once protected him from a second murder trial was changed, but the case still leaves behind painful questions about the early investigation, the missed search, and the way a mother's instincts were dismissed before the truth was found. Julie's story endures because it began with ordinary things: a late shift, a wake-up call, a child staying with grandparents, a locked house that looked quiet from the outside. Then, hidden behind that ordinary surface, a crime so devastating that it reshaped a family and eventually a legal system. In Billingham, Julie Hogg was not meant to become a symbol. She was a young mother, a daughter, a sister, and a woman trying to move into the next part of her life. What happened to her was brutal, but what followed was extraordinary. Ann Ming took the grief that could have destroyed her and turned it into a fight that reached far beyond one courtroom. For almost 17 years, Julie's family waited for the word that should have come much sooner: guilty. And when it finally did, it carried more than a verdict. It carried the proof that a mother's refusal to give up can force even the oldest rules to change.